Dhamasya Mamachubhyam Cha Komaranam Bhavasya Cha Vijnanyasya Chasatvasya Parashatma Parayanam Dhamasya of religious principles or of Yamaraj. Mama, mine, Chubhyam, of yours, Cha, and Komaranam, of the four Kumaras, Bhavasya, Lord Shiva, Cha, and also Vijnanyasya, of transcendental knowledge, Cha, also Satvasya, of truth, Parasya, of the great personality, Atma, consciousness, Parayanam, dependent. Translation by Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Also, the consciousness of that great personality is the abode of religious principles, mine, yours, and those of the four bachelors, Sanak, Sanatan, and Sanat Kumara, and Sanandan. That consciousness is also the abode of truth and transcendental knowledge. So we'll just go on to its verse 13 to 16 combined. Translation, beginning from me, Brahma, down to you, he's speaking to Narada, and Baba, Shiva, all the great sages who were born before you, the demigods, the demons, the nagas, the human beings, the birds, the beasts, as well as the reptiles, etc., and all phenomenal manifestations of the universes, namely the planets, stars, asteroids, luminaries, lightning, thunder, and the inhabitants of the different planetary systems, namely the Gandharvas, Apsaras, Yakshas, Rakshas, Bhutanagas, Urugas, Pushas, Pitas, Siddhas, Vidyadharas, Charanas, and all other different varieties of living entities, including the birds, beasts, and trees, and everything that be, are all covered by the universal form of the Lord at all times, namely past, present, and future, although he is transcendental to all of them, eternally existing in a form not exceeding 9 inches. Amganatamandasagananjana Slakya Jakshanam Tina Tasme Shigave Namaha. Oh, sorry, that's a translation. Now it's the purport. The Supreme Personality of Godhead, by his partial representation, measuring not more than 9 inches as Supersoul, expands by his potential energy in the shape of the universal form, which includes everything manifested in different varieties of organic and inorganic materials. The manifested varieties of the universe are therefore not different from the Lord, just as golden ornaments of different shapes and forms are non-different from the original stock reserve of gold. In other words, the Lord is the Supreme Person who controls everything within the creation, and still he remains the supreme separate identity, distinct from all manifested material creation. In Bhagavad Gita 9:4 and 5, he is therefore said to be Yogeshwara. Everything rests on the potency of Lord Sri Krishna, and still the Lord is different from and transcendental to all such identities. In the Vedic Purushukta of the Rik Mantra, this is also confirmed. This philosophical truth of simultaneously oneness and difference was propounded by Lord Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and it is known as a Chincha Beda Abeda Tattva. Brahma, Narada, and all others are simultaneously one with the Lord and different from the Supreme Lord. We are all one with him, just as the gold ornaments are one in quality with the stock gold. But the individual gold ornament is never equal to the quantity of the stock gold. The stock gold is never exhausted, even if there are innumerable ornaments emanating from the stock, because the stock is Purnam, complete. Even if Purnam is deducted from the Purnam, still the Supreme Purnam remains the same Purnam. This fact is inconceivable to our present imperfect senses. Lord Chaitanya therefore defined his theory of philosophy as achincha, inconceivable, and as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita as well as in Bhagavatam, Lord Chaitanya's theory of achincha, beta abheda tattva, is the perfect philosophy of the absolute truth. So we'll just address a few of these points. So we're hearing that Super Soul is existing in a form not exceeding 9 inches. So what does that actually mean? It's 9 inches? That is it? So that basically, Krishna is can never be defined by empirical senses or empirical analysis. So it's basically to give a bit of an idea, to meditate. If you're meditating on Super Soul, some sort of indication of size. But nevertheless, you get so many scientists, they don't accept the Supreme Lord because they're not able to analyse him according to the empirical systems. We can't see him, we can't measure him, we can't, take samples and, all sorts of experiments in the laboratory. Therefore, he doesn't exist. So, but we can understand if he's not able to be approached through empirical senses, automatically it means he's the Supreme Person, because if he was able to be analysed through empirical senses, that means he's not the Supreme Person. So, he's beyond the empirical understanding. Like empirical, of course, it means tangible to the material senses. You can smell, taste, touch, hear, etc. But it's only when we spiritualise our senses that we're able to approach the Supreme Person. But the scientific community, they're not willing to accept that. They're very proud of their senses and their empirical modern scientific methodology, and if there's something beyond the purview of that system, their conclusion is that he doesn't exist. But nevertheless, for those who have some faith and trying to meditate or understand the Super Soul, some sort of indication is given. Of course, Krishna is the smaller than the smallest, or bigger than the biggest. He can, in 3 steps he's covered the whole universe, or he also can be in every atom and between every atom. So he can't be tied down to a particular or specific, analysis according to our senses. So therefore, we have this indication not exceeding 9 inches. It just gives a bit of an indication, because of our material conditioning. So, all these different personalities and objects and planets, inhabitants of the different planets, different living entities, moving and non-moving, the whole point is that they're existing within the universal form, which in the next verse we'll hear, this is the Brahma Jyoti, all pervading, and everything is existing within that cosmic manifestation. Because the universal form can be presented or is presented in many different ways. So here we're hearing the Super Soul expands by his potential energy in the shape of the universal form. So in one sense we can say the Super Soul is a universal form because he is everywhere. Throughout the whole universe he is appearing everywhere. And also in the next verse we'll hear that the universal form of the Lord, the impersonal feature of the Lord known as Brahma Jyoti. So we're hearing that that's expanding everywhere. From the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna, he showed the universal form to Arjuna, particularly to show his supreme position. So if anybody is presenting that I am God, you should worship me, based on Bhagavad Gita, say, let us see your universal form, and then we can accept. Because there was one of these cheating yogi type personalities, Prabhu was saying that it was in Germany back in the 70s, and this person was performing. He would go around the world with his entourage and perform Ras Leela, presenting that he's Krishna, and he has all these young girls dancing with him. So Prithu, he had one old friend. He said back in the hippie days, that was the words he used, his old friend back in the old hippie days that was part of this group. And so Prithu contacted him and said, if this person is the Supreme Personality, I want to see his universal form. So that was the message he passed on. So eventually he heard back from his friend, and with this yogi's answer, he says, actually, I'm always showing my universal form, but you don't have the eyes to see it. That was his response. So what to do? But anyway, so Krishna showed his universal form to Arjuna, and also in Mahabharata we hear that when Duryodhana and his colleagues tried to capture Krishna, and they thought if they caught Krishna, then the Pandavas would lose their whole enthusiasm and morale, and they'd give up the fight. So when they come to attack Krishna, Krishna showed like a partial universal form, just to show how ridiculous your attempts are. If you try to capture me, I'm the Supreme Person, just see my universal form. And it's interesting that Dhritarashtra, who was born blind, he was blind his whole life. When Krishna showed his universal form, Dhritarashtra actually saw that. So if you were born blind and the only thing you ever saw was Krishna, that's the perfection of life, actually. And also Chaitanya Bhagavat, there's mention of the universal form manifesting, that Advaita Acharya was looking very meaningfully at Lord Chaitanya. So Lord Chaitanya said, Advaita Acharya, what do you want? And Advaita said, I want you, my Lord. What else would I want? Lord Chaitanya said, so what is your desire? You tell me. And so Advaita Acharya said, I want to see what Arjuna saw. And immediately Advaita Acharya found himself on the chariot, on the battlefield of Kuru, etc., and warriors fighting everywhere, and Krishna's universal form manifested in front of Advaita Acharya. So, and so we're hearing here that Super Soul can also be considered universal form, because it's manifesting all over, and also Brahma Jyoti. So, the term universal form can mean many different things, but particularly here we're hearing as Super Soul manifesting. There's not one place where Super Soul is, and therefore he's omniscient. He knows everything because he's everywhere. We may know what's happening to a certain degree in this temple room because we're here, but we don't know what's happening anywhere else. Because we're not everywhere. But Krishna, he's everywhere, therefore he's understanding. He's in our heart, he knows us better than we know ourselves, and every atom, between every atom. So in that sense he's omniscient because he is everywhere. And of course we've got the Virat Purusha, which is another universal form, but that's more of an imaginary form, in that where it's particularly recommended for those who are excessively materialistic and not able to understand Krishna as the Supreme Person, that they can meditate on different forms within this material world, understand them as their like partial representatives of Krishna. Like Prabhupada mentions, this pantheistic conception does not reflect the ultimate reality of the Supreme Lord, but is a technique to bring the mind gradually toward God. So pantheistic basically means seeing God within nature, So that's the Virat Purusha. So as I said, many different presentations of the universal form can be understood. So of course this is Lord Brahma speaking to Narada, and it's interesting, Krishna Kirtan Prabhu sent me some references about Lord Brahma. It's coming from 11th canto, 3rd chapter, 12th verse, purport. I'm just paraphrasing a little bit here. That Prabhupada comments to Srila Sridhar Swami. He's one of the previous Vaishnavacharyas. He has quoted a verse that gives evidence that Lord Brahma generally goes back to Godhead at the time of annihilation. The verse is that at the time of final annihilation of all self-realized souls enter with Brahma into the supreme abode. So at the time of annihilation of the universe, Brahma and all the other residents of his planet, they all go back to Godhead. But there are some exceptions. Srila Sridhar Swami says, because Lord Brahma is considered like the best of the devotee, he's the first living being within the universe and understood to be like the most powerful jiva within the universe and generally expected to be the best devotee, he should surely attain liberation. But he points out that actually there is four different categories, or say 3 different categories of Lord Brahmas. So he says that Prabhupada quotes from the same purport, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says there's 3 categories within the status of Brahma, known as the Kami Brahma, the Jnani Brahma, and the Bhakta Brahma. So he says a Brahma who is an exalted Kami yogi of the universe, they don't get liberation at the end of this, at the annihilation. They'll have to come back to the material world. The Jnani Brahma is understood to be the greatest speculative philosopher. They also have to come back at the end of this universe manifestation. But that Brahma who is the devotee, he gets liberation. But there's one other category also who enters into Brahma but doesn't actually achieve liberation. And Srila Sridhar Swami, he says that there's a class of non-devotees who attain the planet of Brahma by performing Ashvamedha yagnas or other sacrifices. So they perform so many different great sacrifices and they achieve the planet of Brahma, but they don't achieve liberation. So Sridhar Swami comments that certain cases because they're not really considered a devotee, even though they've achieved the planet of Brahma, they haven't established their relationship with Krishna. So, and according to the Kami and the Jnani Brahma, certain cases Brahma himself might not be the devotee of the Supreme Person, and that such a non-devotee Brahma cannot enter the spiritual sky despite having achieved the ultimate universal status of material expertise. So the point there is that also, actually, there's another category as well. Bhagavatam 3:32-15. Prabhupada mentions that there is another case as described, a Brahma who is a devotee of the Lord, but who has a tendency to think himself independent of or equal to the Lord. They can achieve Mahavishnu's abode at the time of annihilation, but when creation begins again, he has to return back and take the post of Brahma again. So the whole point is that the various destinations possible for such an exalted living entity as Brahma definitely prove that any material position is worthless for guaranteeing an eternal life of bliss and knowledge. So it doesn't matter what you achieve, whether you're a billionaire, you're the president of a country, or even you're a Brahma. It doesn't matter what material facility you have or material position, doesn't guarantee that you go back to Godhead at the end of this life. But that simple devotee who's just chanting Hare Krishna, reading Bhagavatam and trying to serve Krishna, develop love for him, he may not have any material facility, but he's first-class candidate, or she is first-class candidate for going back home, back to Godhead. And we know the example of what's his name? Lord Chaitanya used to drink from his cup and still, but Kolavita Sridhar. So, he had nothing. He had practically nothing. He was maintaining himself by selling cups made of banana leaves. Banana leaves are everywhere. Anybody can get a cup, make a cup. But he was making a living by selling cups of banana leaves. And even then, whatever, few rupee he may have got, he spent half of that worshipping Ganga Mata. So, but Lord Chaitanya himself would every day come and, engage in pastimes of Kolavita Sridhar. So it doesn't matter on material facility, but it depends what's in your heart. So you may have the greatest position or the greatest facility in the world, but without love for Krishna, in the end, it's basically worthless. And Krishna says that himself in 1866. We know that verse at Savadam Prijajya, that Krishna promises that if one gives up all other obligations and surrenders to the devotional service of the Lord will personally protect them and bring them back to the supreme abode in the spiritual sky. It is futile and foolish to try to achieve perfection by one's own strenuous endeavour and not surrender to the lotus feet of Krishna. So it's an interesting point to remember. So in the section of today's purport, Prabhupada, he mentions that he used the analogy of the gold, that the gold ornament is identical in quality to the stock gold, or sometimes he uses the gold mine. So the quality is the same, the stock is different. So he uses this word punam, or complete. So this is coming from the Ishopanishad invocation that Om Punam Ada Punam Idam Punat Punam Udachite Punasha Punam Adaya Punam Ivafashishtite. So that the personality of Godhead is perfect and complete. All emanations from him, such as this phenomenal world, are perfectly equipped as complete wholes. Whatever is produced of that complete whole is also complete in itself, because he is the complete whole. Even though so many complete units emanate from him, he remains the complete balance. So this is the proper understanding of Krishna. Krishna is the complete whole, and so many items, objects, manifestations may emanate from him, but he always remains complete, and everything that comes from him is also complete in itself. So Lord Chaitanya, he uses this word, this understanding achincha, beta abeta tattva. That achincha means inconceivable. So this idea of the gold ornament and the gold mine, or the jiva and the Supreme Lord, the Ishvara, comes under this. This is the complete and proper understanding that qualitatively we're the same, but quantitatively different. So this is something that people find very difficult. Some people can find very difficult to understand. Either they want to be God, or God doesn't exist, but this idea that we're the same spiritual quality, but minute in quantity. So therefore Lord Chaitanya used the word achincha, because it's inconceivable to try to understand how that's actually going on. But nevertheless, that's Lord Chaitanya's presentation, achincha beta abeta tattva. So Prabhupada, he says, Lord Chaitanya's theory, achincha beta abeta tattva, is the perfect philosophy of the absolute truth. But nevertheless, this achincha is what is stumbling block for many people to try to understand how that's going on. But through analogy, it's simple to understand. Sometimes he uses the analogy of a drop of the ocean is the same chemical composition as the whole ocean itself. It's just that the quantity is different. The quality is the same, quantity is different. But at the same time, in the purport, sometimes Mayavadis, they try to exploit this, the impersonalists try to exploit this idea that the manifested varieties of the universe are therefore non-different from the Lord. So that simple statement is something the impersonate try to exploit and say, just see, everything is one. That we're God, or we're the same as God, we're equal, whatever. But Prabhupada gives reference to Bhagavad Gita 9:4, that by me, in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. All beings are in me, but I am not in them. So it's a matter of trying to get, one's head around how that's actually working. And of course, it's achincha. It's inconceivable to try to properly understand that. But because we have Prabhupada's purports, it's presented to us in the proper way, rather than, we're hearing from somebody who's confused and they try to present some sort of impersonal understanding. So Srila Madhvacharya, who's in our disciplic line, and he's quoting from the Harivamsa, just paraphrasing his purport, says, because everything is under the control of the Supreme Lord Hari, everything is considered to be his body. He is the original source and master of everything, and therefore nothing should be seen as different from him. Nonetheless, one should not foolishly conclude that there is absolutely no difference between the material universe and Lord Vishnu, who is full of his own unique spiritual qualities. So Madhvacharya was very enthusiastic to defeat the Mayavadis in the impersonalist presentation. And so he's presenting the proper understanding of this achincha beta beta tattva. And perhaps we can conclude with the, of course we're hearing about Lord Brahma speaking, so his prayer, Brahma Samhita 540, he says the Brahma Jyoti is the spiritual light that emanates from the body of the Lord. This universe is a transformation of that spiritual energy, and therefore everything that exists is in one sense connected directly with the supreme body of that Supreme Personality of Godhead. So once again, we have the same quality but a different quantity, and it's sort of easy to understand how a person could misunderstand that, and thinking, well, if we're all one, that means there's no duality. That everything we become God, or we're part of God, or we're merged in, or it's all one. Somehow or other, the Mayavad philosophy has so many different presentations of that idea. But nevertheless, if we're hearing from bona fide sources of the previous acharyas, we can come to the conclusion of achincha beta beta tattva that despite it being inconceivable, the proper understanding is that they're one and different. The quality and quantity. Quality is same, quantity is different. Okay, I'll end there. If there's any questions or comments. Yes, sir. Does that need to be slide?
Yeah, should be on status.
Yep.
mentioning about different classes of pramati and how the material position, confidence in itself, has no qualification for attaining that to God. So does this mean that not that we become envious of material nature and discard it as being irrelevant to devotional service, but that we change our mentality of claiming the position of the Lord in the material world and actually considering our material position and materials and offerings to be delegated for our service to.
Yeah, well, that's a proper understanding. Rupa Goswami has the Yukta Viragra that, we don't falsely renounce things because they don't belong to us to start with, but we utilise them for Krishna service. If somebody says, I renounce this bank, what is the meaning to it? It was never his to start with, But if you can utilise one's wealth in the service of Krishna, that's the proper renunciation. One reporter was speaking to Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was speaking on this renunciation point, and the reporter was saying, well, you're using all these facilities, the cars, and you're flying around the world in planes, and Prabhupada responded, says, if I didn't use them, they'd be completely useless. So in other words, everything can be utilised in the service of Krishna. But the proper renunciation is we're not utilising them for our own sense gratification. Yeah. So, in the beginning, because we're conditioned, it's going to be like karma mishra bhakti. We're trying to perform devotional service, but we're also trying to enjoy the material world at the same time. Even though we know that we shouldn't be, that our conditioning is there, and we shouldn't beat ourselves up about it. But as we progress and we become more mature and spiritualised, this taste for trying to exploit material energy will decrease, and that taste for or propensity for utilising everything for Krishna will increase. But it's just a matter of maturity. It's a good question. Anyone else? Yes, Ru.
Just a comment. Thinking about in the terms of touching to the Tata, in the universal form, I was speaking to, I just had a few run-ins with people of Islamic faith, and they're very hesitant to accept the personal form of that anybody understands the personal form of that and that they often say that a form, that the complete whole could never be limited by what's the word, or one specific form. It's the complete whole, it's everything, and it can, and to say that it's localized in one place, they say that's an offense to God, and so especially deity worship, but in any images. A localized one form of the whole is a big offense. And it makes sense to some extent from that point of understanding, especially in the history of the misunderstandings of religion, of worshipping material things as God, making up an idol or something like that. But the inconceivableness of how the complete whole can be in a localized form of Krishna, Catholic, and how the complete whole exists in a personal form. That's the inconceivable.
Yeah, so a couple of points can respond to that. One thing, just a material example, is you have the Prime Minister And the whole country is one sense, at least the political system is running according to his potency. So when a policeman stands on the road and puts up his hand, it's not that the Prime Minister has to stand there, but his representative is. And when he puts up his hand, the whole power of the government is behind him. So in that sense, the Prime Minister is all-pervading in one sense, you can understand, from a political point of view. You know, if some random guy jumps on the road and puts up his hand, he's just creating a disturbance, you know. But when an authorised servant does that, everybody stops, you know. So, like a CEO in a company, the whole company is working, but it's not the CEO is running around flat out in every department, you know, trying to do everything. His representatives are doing like that. So in another sense, he's all-pervading. His influence, you know, is all-pervading like that. So you just take it to another step for the total cosmic manifestation. Krishna's influence is everywhere. Even though he's a supreme person in one particular place, he's expanding by his influence. And also the sun, you know, the sun globe is in one place, but his influence is all over the universe. You know, you just go out into the sun and you feel it. It's not that the sun is in the temple grounds, but his influence is, even though the sun is so many millions of miles away. So different material analogies we can use to try to understand that. And also on this point of like Islam and also some Christian groups, they struggle to understand that God has a form. So, you know, I've spoken to Muslims before, and it seems for some of them, if you're talking about form, they immediately think material form. You know, they say, well, if you give God a form, it's limiting. But they're thinking material form. I say, yes, it is limiting, but he's God. He doesn't have a material form. He has a spiritual form. You know, so that's the difference. There is no limit. And for the idea of idol worship, etc., that's a common thing from some Christians. But I heard one class from Ridananda Maharaj. He was in Israel and he was going through some of the original Hebrew scriptures, and he says very clearly, if you properly understand what's being presented, this idea of not worshipping idols is referring to other beings apart from God himself, like devas or demigods or imaginary forms like that. It's not saying that you can't have a form of God. It's saying trying to worship someone other than God. He says it's very specific if you properly understand what's being presented in those Hebrew texts. So, but that's what they're presenting in these different groups, and it doesn't matter what we say, they won't accept. But nevertheless, at least we can understand for our own development what the basis of their argument is. That that Krishna has a spiritual form, therefore there is no limit. And that we're not engaged in idol worship, we're engaged in deity worship because Krishna is personally present in that form. I've also heard the argument that how can God... Well, how can, they talk about deity as being an artificial form. Somebody's carved it. How can that be God? And I sort of turn it around and said, well, it's not an artificial form that some sculpture has done. Krishna has manifested through the agency of that sculpture. That's like a transcendental understanding that the deity manifests, Krishna manifests in the form of the deity through the agency of that sculpture. It's not the artist and I'm going to create something that can be worshipped. Krishna within the heart is guiding him how to create that form like that. So different presentations. Many of these people are not going to accept, but at least we've got some response. So, yes, Krishna.
Just reminded me of in relation to the Muslims that wonderful pastime of Chaitanya Rita with the Patana soldiers outside Vrindavan, and Chaitanya Maharaj meets Sufi scholar alongside the soldiers, and he wants to debates that come up were based on the Quran only, and to establish that God is impersonal. And debate, and what's becoming clearly visible in the Quran points out in the later parts of the Quran and mentions that God is a person, it says he's black, you should perform devotional service. And the 50 scholars admit that we know these things but we don't understand, so we disregard them. So it's actually like you're saying in terms of the Hebrew scripture, this information is clearly in there, but they choose to disregard it because they can't understand it.
Yes, Marge.
I'm just going to add a point that because I got Indonesian and the Muslim country, and this unlimited understanding of God, that we have to explain that by saying that God cannot have a form, that is also a limitation. So if they say God is unlimited, God is great, we cannot attribute a form to him because but if you're saying that God cannot have a form, that's limiting God. So, he gave a lot of good, he stated a lot of good points, but that's a very basic point. It's not only for the Muslim, because Muslim faith, even though there's a lot of references, Krishna, Kirtan has said that basically it's impersonal. When you go to a mosque, there's nothing there. So it's basic. So it's the same. The answer will be the same as for any person. Any person. So that basically that Prabhupada very much emphasizes this point, that to say that God cannot have a form, that is limiting. That is limiting God. He can have a form, he cannot have a form, he can have both. He can have all. So if one adopts a particular position, that's a limitation. So that point he used to, he probably would say you have to press on, just press on one point. And just that, you don't have to go to a million points. You just press on the one point, which is an absolute point. And then what is there? This point, they can't respond. But as as a Christian, you have to be very careful and you have to be very respectful. And as a Christian of purification, and then be able to understand.
Thanks much. I know one class you also, years ago, you gave the example on the same point that is there anything that God can't do? And we would say that if there's something that he can't do, that's part of his completeness. If he's perfect and complete, there has to be something that he can't do. Otherwise he's not perfect and complete. So you gave the example of, is there a mountain that he can't lift? And he said, yeah, there is. He can make a mountain that he can't lift. So therefore, that's part of his completeness. But then again, he lifts it. So anyway, I just remember you gave that example. Yeah, one last question. 1 minute left.
So in relation to all of that, does this mean that because these different religions, although originally perhaps had the right conception, they're now contaminated by these philosophies, that our authorities, at least in our Sampradaya and Christian consciousness, kind of Prabhupada's mission, does that mean to say that our authorities, our preaching authorities, are working to clear the misconceptions and different religions in different areas of philosophy?
Well, that would be ideal if we can present what's, the Vedic version. We've all come from different backgrounds and somehow or other had the good fortune of hearing the complete proper understanding according to Bhagavatam. So if we can present that to others, all we can do is present it. Whether they accept it or not, that's up to them. But all you can do is present it. But at least we're presenting what we understand to be the correct understanding. And our duty as devotees, disciples, Prabhupada Nugas, that's what we can do. We present that. We don't make anything up ourselves. We just present the Vedic version. And if there's some piety within the heart of the people we're speaking to, then that's their good fortune. Okay, thank you very much. Prabhupada ki jai.